Coming up on the Sarc Fighter podcast.
And I now have a calcified granuloma in my liver. My doctors now think that was actually probably my first sarcoid experience.
Janet Mockovciak is a world traveler. Now in her 60s, she's been dealing with Sarc, it looks like, since she was a teenager.
And so my Army doctor was probably on rotation straight out of Vietnam, right? So he was used to doing things, treating men in the field. And here I am, a 16-year-old girl, right?
Right. Coming up, Janet shares the story of how Sarc has taken her from an active, outgoing person to a cautious patient with a whole menu of doctors.
This is the Sarc Fighter podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hi everybody, John here. Before we get to today's podcast, I want to remind you that the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is excited to invite everybody to attend their virtual patient education summit the weekend of June 12th and 13th. This is a unique 2-day experience. It's hosted on an interactive platform where people can connect and network with sarcoidosis patients and also care partners from all over the world, and also hear from world-renowned sarcoidosis experts. Whether you're new to sarcoidosis or you have an advanced understanding of the disease, there will be something here for everyone. And so from now until May 21st, you got to hurry. Everyone who registers will save with the early bird rate of $60, so don't delay. Visit www.stopsarcoidosis.org to learn more and to register for this event. And there will also be a link to the event in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter podcast. Well, hello and welcome. This is episode 36 of the Sarc Fighter podcast, brought to you in part by a grant from aTyr Pharma. I do this podcast to offer my fellow Sarc Fighters hope. And you may have noticed the official Sarc Fighter song is called Zombie by Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards, there in Alberta, Canada. Mark is also a Sarc warrior, and you can hear his story, the story behind the lyrics, which are very haunting if you have sarcoidosis. Go back and listen to episode 12 and get caught up on what caused him to write that story. By the way, I call this the Sarc Fighter podcast because I'm fighting Sarc, so are you, whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a patient, whether you're a researcher, you're somewhere in our space, our sarcoidosis space, and I'm sorry that you're here, but I'm glad to have you along. Maybe together we can all come up with some solutions. This is really a place where we all gather, and so many people have told me that they don't know anybody else who has sarcoidosis, or they didn't until they got involved maybe with FSR or started listening to the podcast. So I feel like we're providing a valuable service here and I say we because I refer to me as the host and everybody who's come on to tell their story, share their story, or talk about some of the sarcoidosis solutions. And we normally release every other Monday with the podcast, and so far we've been able to do that. Now, there has been a bonus episode, and as I'm speaking today, it's still very new. It was back on May 3rd. I released this episode, and if you haven't listened, you might enjoy it. It was a town hall hosted by the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, in which I was the moderator on the topic of prednisone. Yeah, prednisone. Now, you've heard me call it the devil's Tic Tacs, right? 98% of all Sarc patients have been on prednisone. It's the first thing that doctors always prescribe, and the side effects are just awful. And so we had Dr. Elliot Krauser, FSR's Scientific Advisory Board Chair, then Jessica Reed, an 18-year neurosarc survivor and patient, and Dr. Sanjay Shukla of aTyr Pharma, which is working on a new drug that shows a great deal of promise in offering an alternative to prednisone. And again, we'll keep you up to date when there's something new to report on aTyr's newest drug. But we all talked about everything that's going on with people with prednisone and how Yes, it works. It gets sarcoidosis under control, but if you take it for a long time, you can have devastating side effects, and those side effects can be as bad, or I would submit worse, than sarcoidosis itself. So go ahead, download that episode, listen to the panel, and you'll get a full and interesting take on how prednisone really affects you. And if you haven't thought about that yet, I think it will open your eyes. Also, if you're new to the disease, you're trying to figure out what you have and what's going on in your body, you Googled around, you found this podcast, you might want to consider, first of all, listening to my interview with Dr. Simon Hart way back in episode 2. It's Sarcoidosis 101. He talks about all the different things that sarcoidosis is, how it manifests itself in your body, what some of the dangers are, and really we went over the very basic aspects of how sarcoidosis messes with you. So that's episode 2. If you want to know more about me and my backstory, it's in episode 1. If you want to hear the backstory as to how the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research came into being, listen to episode 11 with the founders of FSR, Andrea and Redding Wilson. And before we get into today's conversation with Janet, I do want to cover just a couple of things. As you know, I've been talking about this a lot, and I've been training and keeping you up to date. I love to ride my bicycle. And I have been working up to attempting a 100-mile bike ride in one day, which is known as a century. It's sort of like the bicycle version of running a marathon. If you run a marathon, it's 26.2 miles running. So this is 100 miles riding. And I just wanted to let you know that I made it. We did an event, my wife and I and another couple, called the Cap to Cap in Richmond, Virginia. It's capital to capital, where you ride from the capital of Virginia to Jamestown. Think way back to your history book, and Jamestown, which was the capital way back in the 1600s and back. And in total, it was 108 miles, and we finished it. It was the last 30 miles were kind of difficult. My legs were cramping. I was tired. My body hurt. I wanted to stop, but there was no way I was going to stop, knowing that it's an out and back course. So knowing that I just had to keep going, eventually I'd get back to Richmond in our hotel. And so every time I finish a bike ride, I look at sarcoidosis and I say, take that, sarcoidosis. But right now I'm shouting it, okay? Because it wasn't just a daily ride. It wasn't a training ride. This was an event that I had really, really been working towards. And I just had to share with you that I feel like I punched sarcoidosis in the mouth with this thing. So there it is. And of course, now I feel like I have to do it again. But, enough of that. I'm just so happy to have it done. I really am. Now, today's guest has also been staring down Sarc for a long time. And like me, she is an active person. She takes interesting vacations all over the world, and I would love to go some of the places she's gone. Patagonia. She's followed gorillas in Africa. She's been to Iceland, and Patagonia and Iceland are two things that are really on my bucket list. But she loves to hike, bicycle, ski. She lives in Taos, New Mexico, which is one of the ski capitals in the United States. They've got a beautiful place there, and skiing is fantastic. And sarcoidosis is really messing with her ability to do all these things that she loves and is able to do. I mean, not everybody, has the lifestyle and the finances to do these things. She's been very fortunate in that, she's been able to go on these, except for sarcoidosis. And even with the skiing, you're going to hear talk about how she's had to overcome difficulties just gripping her ski poles and breathing while she's skiing. So Janet Mockovciak contacted me after discovering the podcast. She is a fellow member also of the FSR Patient Advisory Council, and our mission on that council is to help bring the patient perspective, the patient voice to FSR, so they receive input from the people they're trying to help. They perceive that they're doing the right things, and by and large, they are fantastic. But they've started the Patient Advisory Council so that we can give input in a formal way back to them. And Janet and I both serve on that council, and very pleased to have been asked to do that. But her struggle, she had a struggle being diagnosed. and she persisted and persisted. Does this sound familiar? Until she finally came up with the diagnosis of sarcoidosis. Her story is like many I've heard here on the Sarc Fighter podcast, where doctors just couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. And she found sarcoidosis on the internet. She calls herself Dr. Google. I guess doctors call patients who Google around Dr. Google. But she was convinced she had sarcoidosis, and even after that, she couldn't get a doctor to agree with her. And then because she persisted and because of the testing that they did, because she pushed, they discovered that, yes, in fact, she did have sarcoidosis. And what did they do? They put her on prednisone, which helped. It helped her immediately, but now she's been on it for a long time, and she's beginning to have the serious complications. Once again, I refer you back to that early May bonus episode. So, because she is speaking that language. So, please stay tuned. My interview with Janet is coming up.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter podcast. Welcome back to the Sarc Fighter podcast, and joining me now is Janet Mockovciak, and she is in New Mexico. Janet, welcome to the Sarc Fighter podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing with this.
Great. Thank you. Well, a lot of Sarc patients are reaching out. They say it really helps to hear other people's stories and sort of understand what other people are going through. It helps them navigate their own sarcoidosis situation. So you are about my age. So let's just say you're in your 60s. But you think you may have had sarcoidosis since you were in high school?
I do. And my doctors think I have, but the records are fairly limited. I grew up in Germany. My father worked for the U.S. government. And so my medical care was at the U.S. Army Hospital in Heidelberg, Germany. And when I was 16, I got really sick summer before my junior year. And they thought that they said I had mono, right? Every 16-year-old gets mono, right? But I just wasn't getting better. And finally, I was hospitalized, and they said I had hepatitis. And my liver function was just totally crazy. But they also said I had, I can't pronounce the word, but it's whatever, nodosa on my legs. I had these, I just had these huge lumps, painful lumps on my legs. And so my Army doctor was probably on rotation straight out of Vietnam, right? So he was used to doing things, treating men in the field. And here I am, a 16-year-old girl, right?
Right. Yeah.
And looking, and I do have the records. My mother saved them. And I now have a calcified granuloma in my liver. My doctors now think that was actually probably my first sarcoid experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Holy cow. So that was the beginning. And then as you got a little bit older, you started having more and more problems to the point where you now have all sorts of doctors and sarcoidosis in all sorts of places. What was the next time that you realized something was wrong?
Really just over the years, I just always had strange things happen, and nobody could ever tell me what was wrong. And, I just chalked it up to whatever. And, I'm not one to really go to the doctor. I'm active. I live an active lifestyle. I didn't even take Advil or Tylenol much before my recent diagnosis. So, but I just had all these weird things happen. But in 2009, I passed out twice. with no real explanation. And once I was behind the wheel of my car, and I was alone, and I felt the world turning upside down. And I had recently passed out going down some stairs, so I kind of recognized the feeling. So I was able to get my car off the road. And when I came back to, I kind of gathered myself together. I had my dogs with me. I was out in the middle of West Texas, just west of Amarillo. And it was crazy. So I then turned around and drove back to Amarillo. And I went to the emergency room. And it was flu season. And I walked into the ER, and it was filled with all these people. And I was like, I don't want to be here. So I left, and I went across the street to an urgent care place. And they did all this testing. They couldn't find anything wrong with me. So, like so many of us, I went through this whole rigmarole of going to my regular doctors in Dallas. And they just, they never found anything wrong with me. I wore a heart monitor. They did all these scans, MRIs. They didn't find anything wrong. So the conclusion was that I had low blood pressure, and that I wasn't retaining water, and I needed to eat salt, use salt in my food, so I would retain water. So, that kind of went on from 2009. That was kind of the last medical adventure that I had until 2018.
Okay. So no more passing out after 2009, and you just putting salt on your food and thinking, okay, that was a pretty easy solution.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden in 2018, it wasn't.
Yeah. So I was in March of 2018. I love to hike. I love to ski. I ride my bike. I'm just always lived a very active outdoors lifestyle. And I was hiking with some friends down in the Rio Grande Gorge. And this is a hike where your worst part is the coming back up instead of the going down. Okay. And on the way back up, I could not keep up with my friends. And normally I would be the leader of the pack. And I could not keep up. I was so short of breath. I just felt like I didn't know what was happening. And I was wearing my Apple Watch, and Apple Watch was new to me at that time. And my heart rate showed, like, I don't know, 189. It was just crazy, very high. And when I got home, I just felt terrible. And I talked to a girlfriend who's a nurse, and she said, you need to go see a doctor. She said, that's just not normal. Yeah. So I figured, okay, it's my Apple Watch.
Yeah, you thought the watch was wrong.
So I gave someone else my Apple Watch, and I bought a new one.
No way. You really... Okay. Well, that's a good way to cure sarcoidosis.
I was sure that there wasn't anything wrong with me, that my heart rate couldn't possibly be that high. So I bought a new Apple Watch. Well, guess what? Still had the same problem. So a couple of weeks later, I did finally go to the doctor because I was continuing to have these silly high heart rates and feeling short of breath. And so I had a complete workup at that time. And they couldn't find anything wrong. Primary care doctor couldn't find anything wrong. It was like the same story as 2009 all over again. And so...
How frustrated are you at this point?
At that point, I'm like, all I was really worried about is at that point in the year, we had a trip planned to Iceland for August and a hiking trip for 2 weeks in Patagonia on the horizon. And all I was thinking about was, well, whatever's wrong, we need to just fix it so I can go on these trips. So, they referred me to a cardiologist, and the cardiologist did all the tests, all the things they do. And there was nothing. And I did the exercise stress test, and I far exceeded, what they expected for a woman in her 60s. And, so I'm pretty competitive. So, I was pleased that I beat the I know you know that because
Yeah.
I hear your stories.
I did the same thing. They're like, you're not sick.
So, but meanwhile, I just knew there was something wrong with me. And, I think the doctors were just wanted to, just make me go away. And I wasn't going away because I wanted to go on these trips, but I didn't want to do something stupid.
Right.
And I just knew that there was something wrong. So I went through this whole cardiac workup, continued, and they did a CT scan in August. So the whole thing started in March, okay? Mm-hmm. So in August, they do a CT scan, and it shows a calcified granuloma in one of my lungs, and it shows enlarged lymph nodes, mediastinal lymph nodes. And they just, nobody really, and I also wore a 30-day heart monitor then, and all it showed was sinus tachycardia. So, they basically said, your heart looks fine, go to Iceland, you go enjoy yourself. And so we went and hiked in Iceland, and, it was awesome. And at that point, though, I told when I started studying, I'm like on Dr. Google, and I decide I have sarcoidosis.
You decided that?
I decided I had sarcoidosis. And I told my primary care physician that I really thought that was in the differential and we really need to look at it. And she really just dismissed me and said that I needed to get off of Dr. Google. And I said, well, I understand how you feel about that, but I am looking at sites like the NIH. I'm looking at the Cleveland Clinic. I am looking at what I feel are well-documented scientific things. I'm not just, looking on, some, patient thing where patients are just talking about their own self-diagnoses or whatever. So I felt pretty certain that I was doing a pretty high level of research. And anyway, they dismissed me. And so my primary care physician, she told me, she said, I think you have costochondritis, which is inflammation of the muscle around your heart and in your chest. And she said, take Advil and see if the chest pain goes away. Because in addition to the shortness of breath, I've had this just chest pain this whole time.
Okay.
And so I took the Advil as she suggested for like 2 weeks, and it did nothing. And so then she said, well, okay, so the next thing we want to check is that you don't have acid reflux that's causing your pain. So she prescribed some prescription antacid sort of thing. And all that did was give me a stomach ache. And so
this is a doctor in Dallas?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. And so I just kept pushing them, because I had this 2-week hiking trip coming up in November to Patagonia. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't feel good. And I was just really worried about my ability to complete this trip. And I just felt like they were being dismissive. So at that point, then she's starting to listen to me, and she orders a pulmonary function test. And my pulmonary function test was sort of borderline, not terrible, but not normal. But, anyway, they didn't know what it was. And then they also did a high resolution CAT scan of my lungs. The last CAT scan had been on my heart. And so at that point, the lungs were not fully visible. So this time they did my lungs, and they found numerous enlarged lymph nodes, mediastinal lymph nodes, paratracheal lymph nodes enlarged, and granulomas in both of my lungs, ground glass opacity in my lungs. And so then my primary care physician is starting to believe that there really is, something wrong with my lungs. And she tries to get me into the pulmonology clinic in Dallas. And the guy who screens everybody, he didn't think that my CT scan nor my PFTs were bad enough. My pulmonary function test was bad enough for me to be a priority to get in to see one of their specialists. So we had to sort of push some buttons and pull some strings and get me in quickly because, we're in September now and I've got this trip coming up in November.
And that is a bucket list trip. I'm so envious. Both Iceland and Patagonia are on my bucket list. So anyway, all right. So now you're pulling strings and you get there and then what?
So I finally get in to see this incredible pulmonologist who is actually now my primary care physician. She left the big hospital system and is off on her own, and she's just a rock star in my books. And so she goes through my medical record, goes through everything, and she immediately wants me to get in and have a bronchoscopy to look for sarcoid because she thinks I've got sarcoid too. I told her I thought I had sarcoid, and she's had seen sarcoid patients both in Dallas and at Johns Hopkins, and she was pretty convinced that's where I was. So I get in with this. I have this bronchoscopy, and sure enough, diagnosis of sarcoidosis came back. But I just felt like it was such a battle to get there. And that if I had not pushed these doctors, starting with the cardiologist and then my primary care physician to get me in to a pulmonologist, I don't know if I would have been diagnosed yet. Right.
And that's, I've heard that story with almost every patient that I've had here on the Sarc Fighter podcast. People, and you've listened to it, you've heard other people say, but sarcoidosis is just not what doctors are looking for.
Right.
It's like a diagnosis of last resort. Right. Yes. So anyway, so now we're all hanging. Did you get to go to Patagonia?
Absolutely. And
you did. Okay.
Yeah. And I started on prednisone before I went. And so the prednisone immediately, like we all know, it's like, woohoo, I'm feeling pretty good.
Right.
Little did I know 2.5 years later, I'd still be on it and I'm not so happy with it. And
yeah. How many milligrams did they start you on?
She started me on 10.
Okay. Well, that's not too bad.
No. And she's not a fan of prednisone, which I now understand why she was reluctant.
Yeah.
But that 10 milligrams really made the difference for me. And the other thing in Patagonia is you're actually at fairly low altitude because the mountains start at sea level.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So it's where it's in the American West, like I live at 7,000 feet. So it was, it felt relatively easy hiking there.
Well, that's good. Then, because you're in Taos, right?
Right. And yeah.
So, all right. So you're on 10 milligrams, you got your trip in, you're feeling better, but that didn't solve your problems because you're still on prednisone and you're now going to a whole new medical system.
Yes.
And you have a laundry list of doctors. So how did we get to what was next in your story?
So interestingly, my husband works for a large company, and one of the company benefits, employee benefits, is this service called Best Doctors. And they provide free to the patient employee, this evaluation, a second opinion. And so my husband and I decided that we needed to pursue the second opinion. And so I submitted all my medical records to them, and they even got the slides of my bronchoscopy, where they were able to diagnose the sarcoid, and went through this whole thing with them. And they came back and said that they didn't feel that my doctors in Dallas were being aggressive enough, and that I needed to be on 40 milligrams of prednisone. And so I think that was, I don't know, maybe 2 months later, because I really wasn't, after the initial boost of the 10 milligrams, I wasn't feeling any better. So then I went on the 40 milligrams of prednisone. And at this time, I also got an MRI of my heart to see if I had any scarring in my heart from the sarcoid. And that showed nothing. So, the cardiologist said, "You're great, move on, nothing wrong with your heart." So, and then in the coming months, I started to have terrible hand pain. I couldn't hold my ski poles. And I know that sounds like such a silly thing, but
right.
For
First
me,
world problems, right?
Exactly. I was like, so silly. But for me, it was really a big deal. And so it was really upsetting. And I also couldn't hold the steering wheel in my car for an extended period of time. Anything that required a grip, I just had a hard time with. So I got referred to a rheumatologist, and they couldn't find anything rheumatological wrong with my hands, and nothing, really physical wrong with my hands. So they wanted me to see a neurologist, and I couldn't get in with a neurologist in the medical system I was in. And it was like a 4-month wait. And they also didn't have a neurologist who was knowledgeable about sarcoid. There was no neurologist in the system with sarcoid.
That was Dallas.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yes. And so at this point, my rheumatologist and my pulmonologist, who were both amazing, and pretty much I had pushed my primary care physician out of the picture at this point, and I was just dealing with these two amazing young women, the rheumatologist and pulmonologist. They told me that they thought that my case was getting a little complicated. It wasn't just pulmonary. They were, thinking there was something neurological going on. So they recommended that I either seek out the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, or National Jewish. And so it just happened the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research was having one of their last live conferences, I think, was in July of 2019 in Denver. And all the docs were from National Jewish. And so I attended that conference. And I was just so impressed with all of the doctors that, like, 3 weeks later, I did all my paperwork and self-referred into National Jewish. And it took several months to get in, but I finally was seen there in November of 2019. I guess I could have gone a little earlier, but I had a trip to Africa planned for a month.
Where'd you go in Africa?
We went to South Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, and Rwanda.
Wow.
We went gorilla tracking in Rwanda.
Oh man, that's a whole nother podcast. I'll have to start a new podcast when we just talk about gorilla tracking. I went to South Africa a couple of years ago and just did the safari thing, and that was just amazing. But anyway, okay. So I didn't get to track any gorillas though.
Yeah. So anyway, at that point, I'm on prednisone and Plaquenil, and the Plaquenil is really helping my hand pain. And I think at that point, I'm back down to maybe 10, 15 milligrams of prednisone.
Okay. So they're giving you Plaquenil because did they discover that you had neurosarc, or what's the Plaquenil targeting? That
was targeting my hand pain.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's used in arthritis as well as, it's used for many different things.
Yeah. A lot of Sarc patients take that.
Yeah. And it was really helping my hand pain. And so that was good. So then November 2019, I got seen at National Jewish, and they do a PET scan and discover that I have Sarc in my heart. And less than a year after I was told in Dallas that my heart was clear. But that was because they only did an MRI, and the MRI shows scarring. It doesn't show active inflammation. And the PET scan is the only thing that shows active inflammation. But likely the inflammation had been there all along.
Huh. Okay. So now you've got it in your heart, and what happens next?
So then the next thing is I go in for a heart catheterization, and they go up through into both sides of the heart, and they're looking for blockages, or can they force an arrhythmia? And they're also looking for I can't think what the last thing is, but
Okay.
when I went in, I was told I would either come out with an ICD, which is a defibrillator, a pacemaker, or an implant, or they will have done an ablation. And the implant is a heart monitor. Well, after quite a bit of time in there with an electrophysiologist who is just amazing, he wasn't able to induce any arrhythmias. And so he implanted a heart monitor that I now have, where I'm constantly being monitored by someone at National Jewish looking for heart arrhythmias. But all that I seem to have is sinus tachycardia, which means my heart races and it goes really fast, but it's always in rhythm.
Okay. So that's a good thing?
Yeah, it is a good thing.
Okay. All right. All right. So now sarcoidosis is spreading through your body. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes.
All right. Slowly. Okay.
Yeah. So then I'm seen by a neurologist at National Jewish as well, and they test, they do the large fiber testing of your neurbs, and my large fiber nerves were fine, but they did biopsies all down my legs, and I have what's called small fiber neuropathy, which is the sarcoid is in the small fibers. And so it causes pain, but it's not, I don't know what the right word is. It's just constant pain. It's
pain, not tingling, it's pain.
It's everything. It's pain, it's numbness. It's, my hands continue to be a problem, but I'm lucky because my feet had not really been affected until recently.
So it's getting worse still.
Yes. Now it's my left leg and my left foot are, have very little feeling left.
You don't have anything on your spinal cord that you're aware of?
Well, interestingly, I was just got back from National Jewish, and the good news is my a cardiac Sarc. We did another PET scan, and after all this treatment, my cardiac Sarc is much better, and my left ventricle is almost clear. The septal wall still has a lot of inflammation, but it's getting better. But they did MRIs on my spine, and there are lesions on my spine, but they're not Sarc. They're not lighting up. So we're still investigating what's going on. So that's a work in progress, shall we say.
Yeah. Wow. Could those lesions be the reason you don't have any feeling in your feet?
They don't think so.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's my problem. So that's why I don't have any knowledge other than what's going on with me. And people have heard my story, but I can barely feel my feet good part of the time. But that's because I do have a big sarcoidosis lesion right at the back of my neck. So I was just wondering. So but this is, and we're talking with Janet Mockovciak, who lives in Taos, New Mexico. And so Janet, so now if we were to list the places in your body where you have Sarc, it's your lungs, it is or was your heart. You've got something going on with the small fiber neuropathy in your legs. Is it any place else?
In my eyes, I don't have the uveitis that they attribute, that they say is Sarc, but I do have dry eyes, and the glands in my eyes are not working properly. And so my eyes are inflamed and red all the time, and they hurt. So, but when you look at the symptoms of small fiber neuropathy, that is one of the symptoms of small fiber neuropathy.
Wow. So what are the doctors doing for you, and what kind of doctors are you now seeing?
Well, I call them my ologists.
Okay. Urologists, right? Yeah. Neurologist. And Right. So what's the list?
I have a pulmonologist, I have a cardiologist, I have an electrophysiologist, I have a rheumatologist, I see a speech therapist to help me with my breathing. I see a gastroenterologist, I see an ophthalmologist, and a dermatologist. Those are my ologists of the moment.
Wow. Now, dermatologist, so do you have it on your skin?
I have little lesions on my skin, but they're not bad. And so it's just, they watch them every 3 months.
Are they by your ankles by any chance? Where are they?
No.
Okay. That's just where I've heard that shows up. And that was something that happened to me that I disregarded for a long time. I have no idea if it's related to sarcoidosis, but quite possibly was. So, but so you're seeing a dermatologist, and what medicines are you taking right now?
Okay. So I'm on prednisone still, and I went through all of the different. I did methotrexate, both oral and injections. I did azathioprine. I'm still on azathioprine, but I'm on a reduced dosage. I get I was getting Remicade infusions. Now I'm doing Inflectra because my insurance wouldn't pay for Remicade, but they're both basically the same biosimilar. They're the same. They're the same thing, just under a different label.
Okay.
And then I'm on Coralinor, which regulates my heart rate because, as I said earlier, I have sinus tachycardia, and so my heart races. It goes too high.
Right.
And so this Coralinor lowers my heart rate without lowering my blood pressure, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I take gabapentin for my small fiber neuropathy. And I use Restasis for my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm on Fosamax now, I just took my first dose this morning, which is for osteopenia. And that is like the first stage of osteoporosis. And the prednisone is reducing my bone density. And so the rheumatologist, they just put me on this Fosamax, and I reluctantly went on.
That is a lot. And you were the person that never went to the doctor.
No.
Right?
Nope. Never went to the doctor, never took any drugs. And here I am, carrying around my pill bottles. Plus, I take a ton of vitamins and supplements.
Right. Yep. Have you tried attacking this from the dietary side at all?
Yes. And I'm actually, I've always had what I think is a pretty good diet. I've been eating organic for almost 40 years. I eat very healthy. What I haven't done before is focused on foods that cause inflammation. And so I've, over the last year and a half, really been trying to cut out foods that figure out what causes inflammation for me, and cut those out of my diet as much as I can. And
dairy, gluten, sugar.
Gluten is not an inflammatory. I don't get an inflammatory response from that. I cut that out for a month and didn't feel any different.
Right.
So, sugar definitely.
How about dairy products, cheese?
I don't eat enough of that, I think, for that to be an issue for me.
Okay. And how about, so like, can you go have, I'm talking about sugar, but also like, white bread, that type of thing?
I haven't eaten food like that since probably I was in college, and that was, decades ago.
Wow.
So I'm sort of skeptical of, and I encourage everyone to eat healthy. And I think that's really important, but I'm skeptical as far as whether diet really it won't stop sarcoidosis from attacking your body, I guess is what I'm saying. I think it may help hold it at bay, and I think it may help you feel better, but I don't think it stops the process.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my opinion.
So you've shared with us that you take these fantastic bucket list trips. And you've been an outdoors person, and you've got a place where you can ski in Taos, New Mexico. But did you tell me in your email that you were skiing with an oxygen pack on?
Oh yeah, I failed to mention that, didn't I?
Yeah. What's that about?
So I every time, anyone who has pulmonary Sarc does the 6-minute walk test at their doctor's office. And you do these 6-minute walk tests in your doctor's offices. And mine were always coming back marginal. Like my oxygen level would be 91, 92, 93, which, is acceptable. And I kept insisting that I needed to have it done at the altitude where I live and do most of my activities, which is significantly higher than sea level.
Right.
And so I had a 6-minute walk test done here in Taos in March, and my oxygen levels were down in the 80s the entire time. They also did an overnight test, and my oxygen was also down in the 80s while I was sleeping. And I had no idea. I didn't realize it was that bad. They prescribed oxygen for me for exercise, any exertion, and for sleep. So, but at the end of ski season, I didn't have one of those little oxygenator things, which I now have. So I was carrying this 9-pound oxygen tank in a backpack.
And skiing.
Yeah.
Well,
but I think the message, John, is that this disease can stop you in your tracks and make you not do the things you love. And I am trying to find workarounds every step of the way. And I think you're the same way, of doing the things you love as much as you can. And, not, obviously we have to alter our lifestyles and we can't do all the things we want to do, but if there's a way to make it work, do it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And people hear me talk about my bike riding on the podcast. And I just completed a 100-mile bike ride, which
wow.
was a big bucket list thing for me. I had done it, when I was younger, pre-sarcoidosis, and I never thought I'd get back to that. But like you, it was just a matter of, I'm not going to let this disease prevent me from doing this stuff. But it's a lot harder than you'd ever would have thought. That's for sure. How frustrated do you get when sarcoidosis is messing with your life?
I get pretty upset. I think, right now, I'm at a stage where I can't walk more than 2 or 3 miles a day, and I'm very slow. My pace is really slow, and I'm under doctor's orders to continue that because of deconditioning and the feeling that if we, and I'm sure this applies to everybody, is when you just stop doing things because you don't feel good, it's really hard to get going again. And so I hate that it's hard to walk 2 or 3 miles. and I hate that I have to make myself do it. And I do that every day. And, I may go really slow, but I'm going. And right now, my biggest frustration is with prednisone. Prednisone is really, has caused me so many problems now. And, I have lipomas all over my body from the prednisone. I've gained over 20 pounds. I have tears in my tendons, in my gluteus minimus, and also where my hamstring attaches. And they think that's from long-term prednisone use. I have this osteopenia and, back pain from the prednisone. And, but I also have what's called adrenal insufficiency. And that means my adrenal glands are not working properly anymore.
That's from the prednisone.
And that's from the prednisone. And I just think if I can get off this prednisone and get my dosage down, that I don't know. That's my hope right now.
Right, right.
Because I feel like the effects of the prednisone are causing me more issues, lifestyle issues.
Did you happen to listen to the town hall meeting we did on prednisone?
I did. And I just loved the part where the guy said that if they were doing a commercial on prednisone now, that would be a mini series when they listed all of the side effects.
Right, right. Yeah, well, when the guy starts going into how the prednisone may cause this, and you may experience this, and he called it poison, and he said it would never get approved today.
Right. Yeah, and I just feel like I'm the poster child for that. I have the hardest time getting down below. I'm down to 9 right now, and I'm 2 weeks in. And every time I get to this level, something starts to happen, and they end up bumping me back up.
So none of the other drugs is really controlling it.
Well,
I mean, like you can't get, like for me, it was prednisone until Remicade started working, and then it took me off the prednisone. But you've been able to get to that point.
Well, I think the Remicade is what caused my cardiac Sarc to be so much better, and my pulmonary Sarc, my lungs look much better. So the Remicade is definitely working, but the problem is I can't get off the prednisone because of all the side effects when I try to come off the prednisone. So medically, for the Sarc, I should be able to be reducing, excuse me, to be able to reduce the prednisone. But physically, my body, my adrenal glands are not allowing that to happen.
Mm-hmm. And it takes a while for your adrenal glands to come back, which they told me mine would, and they seem to have, because I was up on 80 milligrams for a long time, and then it took a whole year to dose me down. And then they would do it like 1 milligram every week or every 2 weeks. So I'd get to 9 and then 8 and then 7, but eventually I got off of it. And you haven't been able to get past the year 9 now?
I haven't been below 9 since November of 2018.
Uh-huh.
And I just can't seem to get there. Every time I think I'm there, something happens. And I go into some crisis.
Right. So you're kind of holding your breath right now today?
I am. So I would love to be able to drop to 8, but I'm terrified to do it.
Right. Well, and 7 is the magic number because your body makes about 7 by itself. That's what the doctors told me. So once you get below 7, then you're really starting to make progress. So you're so close. Wow. So I want to ask you this because your story and mine are so similar, and I'm just curious if you're feeling some of the same things that I am. But have you looked at your own mortality differently?
Absolutely. I'm focusing on living my life and doing as much as I possibly can, because I just don't know about, what Sarc hammer is going to come hit me next.
Right.
And, so when I feel good, I do as much as I possibly can. But I think it's also, and I think you're similar in this case, is learning to listen to your body and to not do something just because you used to be able to, or you think you should be able to. And I think for me, that's the hardest thing, is learning to say no to doing things and confessing that I don't feel good and I don't want to do things. But
you still get up and you do that walk every day or most days. And the doctors have told me that staying active and, quote unquote, physically fit are critical to staying ahead of this thing.
Yep.
So
I'm hearing the same thing. It's like, I don't have a prescription for the activity, but I have clear doctor's orders for it.
To keep doing it. Yeah. So now you're working with the foundation for sarcoidosis research alongside me and many other people on the Patient Advisory Council Committee, whatever it is, PAC. How are you enjoying that?
I really do enjoy it, and I'm hopeful that our voice will be able to be reflective of other patients, and that we can help the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research do even better work than they've been doing. And, I just am so grateful for all the things that the foundation offers to patients, and, the advocate system where people can get help and individualized help, I think is phenomenal. And I just think it's so important, the work that they're doing. And I think that getting the pharmaceutical companies that are working on drug research to have more patient voice in the work that they're doing and access to patients is so critical, because they can't do what they're doing in a vacuum. And because this disease is so strange and so individual for each of us, it's so important that they have a wide variety of people that they're able to get access to. And if it weren't for the foundation, how would they do that?
Right. Exactly. Well, do you have another great trip planned?
No.
No? Well, you better hurry up and plan one. Seems like it keeps you going.
It does, but this COVID thing has me, I'm fully vaccinated, been fully vaccinated, but I caught a virus in April, a stomach virus, and my husband caught the same thing. He was sick for 24 hours. I was sick for 3 weeks. Oh. I got over the stomach virus, but the adrenal insufficiency took me down for 3 weeks, and I had to go back on a different type of steroid to bring my adrenal glands back into functioning. And that's put me back into scaredy cat mode because what I realized is, with the immunosuppressants that we're on, or that I'm on, and so many of us are on, that there are other opportunistic viruses lurking out there just waiting.
True.
And
true.
And so I'm not in a rush to head back out into the greater world. And I worry about the vaccination rates around the world. And, look at what's happening in India and Nepal. And I think that for right now, staying in the US, and where we have high vaccination rates and excellent healthcare accessibility. That's the other thing that scares me, is traveling to the developing world and access to healthcare.
Yes, for sure.
And I never used to worry about that, but now I worry about it.
Right. Well, there's a lot of great things to see in the United States.
Exactly.
Right. So I've never seen the Grand Canyon, and so we're taking a trip to the Grand Canyon in September in Zion National Park in Bryce, and we're going to ride bikes and hike. And like you, I am just on pins and needles because I don't want anything to go wrong between now and then. So
I get it.
I'm looking forward to it. Well, Janet Mockovciak, thank you for your service on the Patient Advisory Council, and thank you for sharing your story with us here today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all you're doing and helping spread the word about sarcoidosis, and helping others hopefully get the treatment they need sooner than I did, and the diagnosis.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm so grateful that Janet reached out. It is just gratifying to me that people are listening to this podcast, and when someone tells me that this podcast helped them to get to the next thing in their sarcoidosis journey, it really pleases me. And when a fellow Sarc patient, Sarc fighter, Sarc warrior, call us what you will, has heard other people's stories and says, I'm willing to share my story, that really makes a difference. And so when people email me and they say, John, I'd like to come on, I'm just tickled to death to make that happen. So, and please don't forget to sign up for the upcoming FSR Summit. This is in 2021 on June 12th and 13th, and there is a link in the show notes. Please send me an email. That's also in the show notes if you have some thoughts on the Sarc Fighter podcast. Follow The Sarc Fighter with the word "the" in front of Sarc Fighter on Instagram, and you can also just Google, do the search function on Facebook, search for Sarc Fighter, and please follow along on Facebook as well. I post a lot of updates and pictures, and you can kind of keep up to date with my life and what's going on with the podcast and with my fellow Sarc Fighters. I do appreciate everybody's interest in the Sarc Fighter podcast. So if you like this show, would you just tell one person? Just tell one person, and let's continue to grow the number of people who are listening and benefiting from all the hard work and the stories that people are telling here on the podcast. Also, give it a nice review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast downloads. Thanks again to Janet for joining me here today, and until next time, keep fighting.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.